It seemed as if a total dissolution of nature was taking place. The roaring of the sea and the wind, the prodigious glare of almost perpetual lightning, the crash of the falling houses, and the ear-piercing shrieks of the distressed were sufficient to strike astonishment into angels. This account could easily have been written in recent weeks or months, as we have been witness to the disturbing frequency of natural disasters taking place in every corner of the earth. Devastating hurricanes in the Caribbean and the United States, terrible monsoon flooding in Southeast Asia, the wildfires burning across our province. Just this morning, I saw CNN struggling to cover the terrible earthquake in Mexico and the hurricane in Puerto Rico, using split screens to report both at the same time. But the account I opened with was written 245 years ago by none other than Alexander Hamilton, the $10 founding father, who before becoming a Broadway star, also had a career in American politics. It was this essay that Hamilton wrote as a 15-year-old about the Caribbean hurricane of 1772 that caught the attention of a local minister who sponsored the young man to receive an education in New York, placing him on a path to greatness. Hamilton's incredible writing talent and his way with words impressed his sponsor. And the minister was especially enamored with the way in which Hamilton understood the storm as a result of the people's iniquity. Hamilton wrote, "That which in a calm, unruffled temper we call a natural cause seemed then like the correction of the deity. Our imagination represented him as an incensed master, executing vengeance on the crimes of his servants." Now, in recent months, I have heard many people remark that the weather today feels sort of like divine punishment. This is a theologically complicated proposition. Now, it's true, our Torah is filled with many warnings that God will exact punishment on those who do not follow the commandments by means of weather-related wrath. One of the traditional sections of the Ve'ahavta from Deuteronomy, V'haya im Shamoah, reads, "Take care not to be lured away to serve other gods and bow to them. For Adonai's anger will flare up against you, and God will shut up the sky so that there will be no rain, and the ground will not yield its produce. And you will soon perish from the good land that Adonai is assigning to you." Now, if that didn't sound familiar, it is because this paragraph was removed from Reform Sidurim generations ago. The theology, was understood as too simplistic by the rabbis, the early Reform rabbis, too black and white. With a handful of fundamentalist exceptions, few religious thinkers today follow such theology to explain natural disaster as divine response. We don't explain a flood with theology. I cannot. And I also believe that Judaism does not allow us to do so. So what do we say then to respond Jewishly to the environmental crisis that is swirling around us? Tonight, I want to present 3 texts to help us understand our tradition's perspective and directive in our concerns for the earth. When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans 12 years ago, my colleague in Boston, Rabbi Howard Jaffe, gave a memorable sermon about the Jewish approach to why. In his sermon, Rabbi Jaffe introduced me to a Talmudic concept that actually gave me a great deal of theological solace. Olam kaminhago noheg. The world pursues its normal course. The rabbis posit in the Talmud, if a man stole a measure of wheat and sowed it in the ground, it would be right that the wheat not grow. After all, it's stolen. But say the rabbis, the world pursues its normal course. If a man has intercourse with his neighbor's wife, it would be right that she not conceive. But nature pursues its normal course. And even out of an adulterous relationship, a child is born. Nature pursues its normal course. Olam kaminhago noheg. Rabbi Jaffe continued in his sermon, a bowl-shaped city built below sea level, with insufficient protection from rising waters, when a hurricane hits, there is devastation. Olam kaminhago noheg. Nature pursues its normal course. This reasoning gives solace from the retribution theology presented by Alexander Hamilton, and it made me feel better after Katrina. But today, I don't feel so settled. Yes, there is a natural course to the world, but what happens when the normal course is no longer the way of nature, but has become altered by our human actions? Though we brush off the notion that God causes an earthquake or flood in order to punish, we cannot lose the sight of the Torah's insistence that our actions have consequence. One can no longer deny the effects of rising temperatures on our global climate, and the consequences are among us every day. What experts label a 500-year flood has occurred in Houston each of the last 3 years. A large majority of environmental scientists warn that if global temperatures rise by more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, the repercussions will be severe and in some cases irreversible. Right now, we are at a 0.85 degree increase, nearing closer to that frightening benchmark. The climate of our Earth is in severe crisis, and it is now time for us to stop asking why, and instead to ask, what now? Tomorrow morning, we will read from the famous story of the binding of Isaac. The account, though powerful in its own right, is one of but 10 trials endured by Abraham during his life. 10 trials, taught our rabbinic sages, that showed Abraham to be the kind of person God would need to be the father of the entire Jewish people. How would he cope with being commanded to sacrifice his beloved son, with famine, with the capturing of his wife, with having to circumcise himself? Abraham proved himself to be an extraordinary person to endure these life-changing trials and pass these tests. So what was it about him before this happened that singled him out in the first place to be the progenitor of an entire people? The Torah doesn't really say, but the rabbis use their imaginations to fill in the blanks. So, let's go back to Abraham's first test and study a famous midrash about what happened in the moments just before God said to Avram, Lech lecha, go forth from your land, from your home, from your father's house to a land that I will show you. The midrash goes like this. A man was traveling from place to place when he saw a birah doleket, a palace radiating light. He said, "Is it possible that this castle lacks a person to look after it?" The owner of the building looked out and said, "I am the owner of the castle." Similarly, Abraham said, "Is it possible that this world has no guide, no one to look after it?" And the Holy Blessed One looked out and said to him, "I am the master of the universe." Hence God said to Avram, "Lech lecha, go forth." The deeper meaning of this parable depends on how one translates the word doleket. Rashi understands doleket to mean illuminated, filled with light. So in Rashi's reading, Abraham sees a world filled with light, the sun during the day, the moon and stars during the night. And he says, is it possible that this amazing, wondrous palace has no guide, no owner? Couldn't be. God peeks out after the question and says, "I am the owner of the castle." This understanding of the Midrash has Abraham seeing the miraculous beauty and wonder of the world, and he concludes, there must be one God in charge. This is an important theme of Rosh Hashanah. We celebrate the creation of the world and we declare God HaMelech, ruler of all. But there's another way to translate doleket. Not as a palace filled with light, but as a castle in flames. Or in other words, the world is on fire. This makes sense to me. First of all, it's actually a more literal translation of the Hebrew. And secondly, just as we look at our world today and see environmental, social, and political devastation, so too in many moments of Jewish history have commentators looked around to see their world on fire. Here's what Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of the UK, wrote about the birah doleket. Abraham sees a palace. The world has order and therefore it has a creator. But the palace is in flames. The world is full of disorder, evil, violence, and injustice. Now, no one builds a building and then deserts it. If there is a fire, then there must be someone to put it out. The building must have an owner. Where is he? That is the question, and it gives Abraham no peace. That is the starting point of Jewish faith. Faith is born not in the answer, but in the question. Jewish faith begins not in wonder that the world exists, but in protest that the world is not as it ought to be. It is in that cry, that sacred discontent, that Abraham's journey begins. It is from this reading of doleket that we see that Abraham's belief in God is his partnership with God. We have a sacred and urgent mission in life. We have to put out the fires. The challenge of the birah doleket, the palace in flames, is to take some water and extinguish those flames as we partner with God in fixing the world. To acknowledge that when we feel temperatures rising, that we can play a role in cooling down the planet. So how do we put out this fire? What is our action plan to set the world back on its course of order? We have finally arrived at text number 3, the voice of our prophet Ezekiel. I was amazed as I spent time preparing this sermon to find an incredibly modern and relevant voice about our human responsibility in a natural disaster. Ezekiel brings his prophecy to the people as he considers their tepid action in preparing for the destructive power of a hurricane. Ezekiel chastises the leaders who have misled people into complacency, saying, "Shalom, all is well," when in fact, Ein Shalom, nothing is well. And then he gives these people an interesting nickname, Tachei Tafel, daubers of plaster. I'm paraphrasing, but Ezekiel basically says this: you have built shoddy construction and daubed plaster to make it look nice. But a hurricane will come and the walls will collapse. The foundations will be exposed for what they are, and you will be asked, what became of the plaster that you daubed on? This is good biblical imagery for our time. Consider the issues of infrastructure that need to be addressed in real ways and not just daubed over to make things appear to have been improved or changed. These problems of environmentalism require real change in our lifestyle and our production levels. And we have to figure out how we are going to make these changes on personal, communal, national, and global scales. This is a change that goes beyond recycling and composting, though that is a good way of taking personal responsibility. But those solutions are also just plaster. This is a global issue that requires strong leadership and policy. We are all so interconnected, especially on matters of environment, that we cannot hide behind national boundaries. This summer, when I was serving as a rabbinic faculty at Camp Kalsman in Washington, the smoke from the BC wildfires hung over the camp. Jokingly, the camp director told the campers that the air was hazy because we Canadians brought it down in our duffel bags. How often does it happen that one country's problems spill onto the entire world? The Paris Climate Accord is, of course, an attempt at addressing this very idea. And it is an abdication of global leadership that the US government has pulled out. Everything is connected, and one country's shoddy plaster has real consequence on another's citizens. This is an issue, I believe, in which Canada can be a leader on the world stage. We can be proud to live in Vancouver with our initiative to be the greenest city in the world by 2020. But we should not sit back in smugness and feel satisfied that we have done enough, or think that if we clean up our city, the work is done. Ezekiel is speaking to us today in our time. If we continue with the status quo, the impact will be disastrous for future generations. Our tradition is quite clear that Judaism demands an ethical consideration of those who will come after us when we make decisions that will affect their lives. As we begin a new year and celebrate the creation of the world, let us acknowledge that indeed the castle is burning with the flames of environmental negligence. May we follow in the path set for us by Abraham to respond and be the firefighters of our generation, so that our descendants yet to come will know the glowing light of beauty that shines from our planet. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, osei ma'aseh bereshit. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, source of the wonders of creation. Amen.